Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and we're getting an update today on Forum Energy Metals, traded on the TSX.V under the ticker FMC, and on the OTCQB under the ticker FDCFF. And I'm joined today with the Vice President of Exploration at Forum Energy, Dr. Rebecca Hunter. And Rebecca, it's great to get you on the show again to get an update on some of the first assay results coming out at your Aberdeen Uranium Project. This is in the Thelon Basin, and you're focused in on the Tatiggaq deposit here. Last year, you put in a couple of holes and hit some pay dirt, and so this is some of the first follow-up holes from this year's 7,000 meter program. And this is going to be split between this area we're looking at today. There's more holes still to come from Tatiggaq, and there's even more holes still to come from some different regional targets. We'll get to all of that and more, but I want to kick things off by taking a deeper dive into these 11 holes that you just released to the market on November 26th. It looks like the two holes that get the most airtime here are holes number 12 and 14. I won't steal your thunder, but walk us through the grades, the widths, and what you're seeing from these holes.
All right, thanks, Shad. It's nice to be here and chatting about our results here. Finally getting some results. So yeah, 12 and 14. So the first part of our exploration project was to basically kind of two things, was to get back into Tatiggaq and explore Tatiggaq Main and Tatiggaq West and build strike length, build thickness and stuff like that, infill and expansion. So the first two holes were into Tatiggaq Main and basically, yeah, into the kind of what we know as the main zone. And the real goal here was to kind of provide more information along the similar fence that we did in 2023 there. So our really good hole from last year was TAT 2, and that was where we got the 2% roughly U3O8 over about 11 and some meters. And so TAT 14 in particular was kind of to drill that a bit to the south, another 10, 15 meters. And essentially what we did there is we intersected another lens. So these deposits are basically, or this deposit area consists of these kind of steep, high grade lenses, high to moderate grade lenses. And so the first one that we hit last year, that really nice one, that's a lens, and then we stepped back and we hit another one. That came in at, 7.6 meters at just over 1%. So that's kind of what we are going for there, was to show the width and show additional lenses was the first kind of component of our drilling.
Well, and so to that point, you found a lens last year, you found another lens this year. These stacked lenses are starting to pull together into something that's looking like a deposit forming here. But I think you were mentioning to me off mic that the next step in some of this is really to start stepping out. But this is not a copper project where you're going to step out hundreds of meters. This is something where, because of the nature of the beast here with this uranium, you want to do more narrow step outs to kind of keep dialing in and keep finding the extent of these lenses and build the strike length. So maybe talk to us about how you would follow up on some of these holes moving forward.
Yeah, so one of the lessons learned here is that, there is quite a bit of structural complexity in these deposits. So it kind of is analogous in some respects to kind of a vein system, like a gold vein system. So you got these faults and you got, veins of gold, in this case, uranium, and there's a bit of a pinch and swell aspect along strike. So that's kind of what we learned, is that, and so you get these high grade lenses, but there's a little bit of variability within them, and there's multiple ones. And so stepping out in this kind of a system, certainly you can't step out big. And so some of the holes that we did were bigger step outs, and we hit, phenomenal alteration, maybe some weak mineralization, but not the same continuity. So you really have to step in close. If you step in too far or you step out too far, it gets trickier and trickier. So that was a lesson learned with that. And so, but essentially we do have these really good lenses that we still can chase up. We just have to be smart about it and follow it geologically in that way.
Well, and talk a little bit about Tatiggaq West, because the first two holes we just discussed, the 12 and 14, that's in the main area, but you did have hole 11 here, 35 meters, grading 0.11% U3O8. And so that's a little bit wider intercept, a little bit lower grades. So how is Tatiggaq West maybe differing from Tatiggaq Main so far?
So it shows that, yeah, besides the grade, one of the biggest aspects of Tatiggaq West is that there's way more lenses. And so Tatiggaq Main, for whatever reason, is concentrated into about 3 to 5 kind of lenses, and the bigger ones were the ones we hit in all those last holes I discussed. But Tatiggaq West has more than that. So it's like, it looks like 7 lenses or up to 10 lenses, but they're narrow. So they're more like a meter to 3 meters maybe. And so you get some pretty nice grades within there, but there's multiple ones. So for whatever reason, Maine has really focused the fluids there, maybe due to the structural setting there might be slightly different, thicker faults or more brecciation or what have you. But West is just narrower but wider. So like narrower individual veins, but many veins, like I said, over 35 meters. So it's just a slightly different variant. And that's, I guess, what we'll be dealing with at Tatiggaq. So, and the upside there is that maybe chasing these, it'll be more kind of Tatiggaq Main stuff and West stuff together. But there's definitely upside for the high grade veins or lenses like we have at Tatiggaq Main.
Well, and let's zoom back a little bit and talk about your neighbors at Orano. They have the Qavvik deposit, which you can draw some analogs to. And I think it was also nice that Orano hosted your team over at their core shack just to get an idea of how the mineralization looked in their drill core versus what you're seeing at the Tatiggaq project. And so there's a lot of similarities between the geology here in the Thelon Basin between the two different projects. Could you maybe walk through some analogies of how what you're seeing here would relate to the Qavvik project that Orano holds?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, Orano was very generous this summer. So they just gave us permission to go look at their core. So their project, they have all their core racks and it's all stored there, basically about 15 kilometers east of our camp. And so we just had the opportunity to go there and go look at the core. And that was very enlightening. I've seen bits of it here and there, but it was nice to actually delve into it in more detail. And I mean, it looks exactly the same, essentially. Like, same rock types. It's structurally controlled. I believe got these steep structures, the same as we do. And then you get the mineralization. And so essentially you get these higher grade lenses, of course, 2%, or like even last year we hit up to 23%. This year we hit up to 8%. But when you kind of average that all out over, a bigger area, when you take the whole mineralized intercepts, which like at Tatiggaq West can be, 30 meters thick. When you average that down, then you're getting the 0.5 grade, 0.5% U3O8. And that's what we get at Qavvik with their different deposits. They have a similar thing where you get these higher grade lenses, but when you push it all together and you do that whole envelope and you bring it all together, that's where you get that kind of 0.5% to 1% grade.
Well, so now let's even scan out even further and talk about the Thelon Basin versus the Athabasca Basin. Because I think a lot of, let's just say, retail investors that they're not geologists. I'm not a geologist either. And, when we're trying to parse through these drill results, people will make comparisons, but that's really sometimes apples and oranges instead of apples to apples. So maybe talk about this is more of a basement hosted deposit that you're looking at here. Some of the ones in the Athabasca have those unconformity style deposits where the sandstone meets the basement rock, and there's that mixing of the two different rock packages where there'll be these high grade zingers. You do have some targets on your property that are like that, but maybe speak about the differences between the Thelon Basin and the Athabasca Basin in that sense.
Yeah. So essentially, like you said, there's two different end members of the unconformity model. And there's the ones, yeah, those real zingers happen at the unconformity where you have the sandstone and then the older basement rocks along faults. And then the basement hosted ones happen below the unconformity. Either the unconformity is there and it's just you're way deeper, or it's eroded or it's gone. Anyways, yes. So basically, those types of deposits in general, so there's several of those that have been discovered in the Athabasca Basin. Some of the early ones were only that. Those kind of unconformity the ones at the unconformity contact were found a little later. And yeah, their grades are lower as well. So usually basin hosted deposits in the Athabasca are about 0.5 to 1%, kind of in that range. And so in that way, it's very comparable. The difference is that in the Thelon Basin, we haven't found the ones at the unconformity, but that's because we haven't looked. for the most part, there's just very little drilling that's been done to actually look for those kind of zinger ones that would be at the contact. And so we're also trying to do that. And I think one of the things about this project, which is hard to communicate, is that this is a big mandate. So we already have two kind of proto deposits, I guess, the Qavvik and Tatiggaq, and we're trying to build those, and those are basement hosted ones. So we're not going to have, the chances are unrealistic, I guess, to some degree, that we'll have like 20% grades kind of on those ones because these are basement hosted ones. Even in the Athabasca, you don't get that. But we're also looking for these other ones too. Like this project has a lot going for it, and it's kind of hard to communicate the scope of what we're trying to achieve. And so, yeah, we don't want to set unrealistic boundaries to kind of what we want to find at Tatiggaq and Qavvik, but we still think they could be significant and they'll be kind of hopefully on the scale to what Orano has. So Orano's little basement hosted deposits are between 30 and 60 million pounds kind of thing. And that's kind of what we're trying to potentially achieve at Qavvik and Tatiggaq. And then we have all these other zones too that we're trying to find. And those ones we're trying to hope you'll have kind of those classic unconformity deposits, and then we will see what the grades are.
Well, let's dig into that because you haven't put out those holes yet, but you have drilled some holes at Ayra, at Ned, and at Loki, and you have a lot of other targets besides those that you could go after in future seasons. So, talk about some of those regional targets that may be going after the unconformity, and I guess which one was the team most excited about this year?
Yeah, so like you said, we have several targets and we focused on those three. And so, yeah, the assays are, and the results are pending there, but they're really good. And so one of the things is like I said, so far in the Thelon, those types of unconformity contact deposits haven't been found, or evidence of them kind of existing hasn't been found. And so what's exciting about what we achieved this summer, in particular at Ayra and Loki, is that we actually have extreme alteration, the clay alteration, and elevated counts. We'll see what the assays actually show for actual uranium content in the sandstone. And so this hasn't been shown before. So it shows that at least the fluids are happening, the same kind of processes are happening that we see in the Athabasca. It's now just a function of trying to find it. And we have several targets. And so it'll be going forward, we'll be testing a bunch of these targets, as well as, because overall unconformity deposits as a whole are small, they're narrow. And so they are tricky to find at the best of times, even the big ones. So it's really just getting a critical mass and drilling into this project to really show the potential that it has.
Well, and you'd alluded to Qavvik as well. Now, Qavvik is still going to be more basement hosted like Tatiggaq, but you did put two holes in there that are still pending. Talk to us about that target.
So that's another one, just like Tatiggaq, big gravity anomaly, some holes, wider space drilling that Cameco did, or that I did, I guess. And so hit really good mineralization, not as high as Tatiggaq, but again, higher than Tatiggaq West, though, like still fairly significant intercepts and wider intercepts. So, Tatiggaq is kind of confined so far, though the depth extent hasn't been totally figured out yet, to that kind of samopolitic lens within the granite at Tatiggaq, just the geology background. But at Qavvik, it's all within the kind of samopolitic basement rock. And so there is no kind of confining lithology. So the mineralization that we hit this year went from basically almost below the overburden, so 10, 20 meters, overburden being the till, to 400 meters. And so, but with lots of, kind of unmineralized components between, intervals between, but lots of like several lenses going for hundreds of meters. So it's just the scale of Qavvik is quite impressive and very exciting. And we also this year hit the highest counts that we've ever hit at that from the historic drilling. So that's also very encouraging. So we are excited when we finally can get those results and actually show the grade potential at Qavvik, which really hasn't been demonstrated to this point.
All right, and then from my understanding, there's also still 8 more holes waiting for in the Tatiggaq area that you had stepped out a little bit further, maybe looking at structure and just how the geology ties together. So talk about those 8 other holes still pending from Tatiggaq.
So yeah, so there's kind of two phases to Tatiggaq, and it was, trying to work within the deposit footprint area, try to expand it, try to build scale as best we could, figure it out a bit more, build width. But the second component was to actually drill outside of what we knew and try to find additional lenses along some parallel structures. And so that's what those holes were for. And so we intersected really good alteration, and we'll see what the assays or the geochemistry comes back. But we did hit another elevated zone, so up to 700 counts, I believe, to the north. And so potentially a new zone developing. We'll see what the geochemistry shows, but it should be fairly favorable at 700 counts. And definitely we got the right alteration. Again, the structure you get, these can be narrow as we know, and they can be a little bit nuggety, so you can be, really close and miss. And so I think the upside here is that there's a lot of potential still at Tatiggaq, but it's just going to take that perseverance and, kind of narrow step outs to figure it out.
Well, and just building on that point you're making, a lot of people, just to set the expectations right, this is not a one season kind of thing. You did your first holes at Tatiggaq in a while last year where you had those first full and had that nice intercept where you found the first lens. Now you're layering on more data, and there's still a lot of assays still to release from this whole program, from all the targets we just discussed, and even from Tatiggaq and that area that has the 700 parts per million on the scintillometer. At least there's some radioactive material there. So as far as looking at follow-up drill programs, let's say the next season and the season after that, what do you think needs to happen, Rebecca, to tie this all together to something where you'd be able to put out an initial resource?
Yeah, there's a lot to do. So I guess to answer the initial resource question, yeah, it's going to take another 2 years of drilling. Like, to be honest, more. It depends how much we can drill. We can definitely put together. So the plan is to put together a preliminary internal resource on the Main and the West, and so get an idea there. Like, we may publish that, I don't know. There's still a lot of infill to be confident on that, but we're working towards that to determine the rest of the anomaly, if it's mineralized and if it has additional zones. Again, yeah, that's going to take several more years, 2 more years at least, to kind of get a handle on that, depending on what we see, of course, and the continuity we see in other areas. And yeah, to your point, I mean, this isn't a 1 year plan. And so, even the best deposits in the Athabasca took hundreds of holes to find. Some of like MacArthur River, which is obviously phenomenal and an anomaly in of itself, took a lot of holes. And so we have we're just north of 50 holes into this bigger anomaly with a little bit more structural complexity. So it's just going to take, we need 3 years, like another two at least, to just kind of get some really good insight into what the potential is here, not only at Tatiggaq, but Qavvik, and then everything else. And so, I mean, honestly, I'd like to see this as a 5 year plan to really give shareholder value here. I don't need 10 years, I don't need 20 years, but I definitely need three to build this project into what I think it has the potential to host.
And Rebecca, I think that's a reasonable ask because this is not something that happens in just one drill season or two. It takes a couple of years to tie this all together. Like you say, you've now got to test the mineralized extent of the strike and keep doing these step outs, maybe 12.5 meters to 15 meters at a time to keep dialing
Yeah.
in and widening out these lenses, but also the strike length itself. Now, as you await and as people are listening to this that are awaiting the other drill assays, talk to us about a reasonable expectation of what success looks at those 8 holes that are still coming from Tatiggaq, some of that step out you did, but also the other 11 holes coming from Ayra, Ned, Qavvik, and Loki. What will success be in your mind on some of these assays when they come out, just so people have the right expectations?
Yeah, so for the rest of Tatiggaq, I mean, we're stepping out. We're looking for alteration. Like, so most of it isn't even in the geochemistry in a big way. it's showing, we have the fluids moving, which we've already demonstrated, but we'll present that more. And then maybe up to, several hundred ppm, like especially at this potential new zone to the north, it's 700 counts. So, I mean, we're not going to have percents here by any means, but we're going to have well over 100 ppm, kind of in those kind of areas. And that's interesting. That's good. I mean, the unconformity world, when we're looking for this stuff, like we go from dead to mineralized. And it's the alteration and kind of the key structures, which I think we have a good handle on, the key alteration, the key structures that really kind of hone you into these zones. And you got to have, like I said, a bit of perseverance and just an eye for kind of honing into sometimes subtle things. So, anyways, that's kind of what the rest of Tatiggaq is showing, is that we have these fertile structures still, which if they're fertile, that means it could be mineralized. So there's that. Qavvik, we really haven't showcased that because it just gets complex. Like I said, the scope of our project is it's a bit crazy because we don't have just one zone that we're looking for. So Qavvik's another zone and it's mineralized. And so we're going to show you mineralized intercepts. Again, they're not going to be the incredible stuff that we can get in the Athabasca, which is lovely, and I hope to present on stuff like that someday too in the Thelon. But yeah, it won't be this year. But it's going to show you some good grades and good potential. And so I think Qavvik is very exciting in that regard. And then for the rest of the project, again, it's that alteration and really showing that we have the sandstones altered, the basin is altered, and that was the first step that honed, the early pioneers in the Athabasca to the big deposits that are being mined today. And so I think that's the kind of early stage stuff that we can demonstrate that hasn't been ever demonstrated before in the Thelon Basin.
All right. Well, we'll keep looking for all of those assays as they come back in. But yeah, even if you can just prove the point that Tatiggaq is expanding into that new area and that some of these other targets like Qavvik, whole new zone, but also the Ned, Ayra, and Loki, just that there is that alteration, that it's the potential to make those kind of deposits there if you're seeing that kind of mineralization in the drill core will be a proof of concept. Obviously, that will require more follow-up drilling. So we'll keep following along with all the news here at Forum Energy Metals. And for people listening in, if you want to follow along with the news, definitely click on the link below this interview. It takes you right over to the Forum Energy website, straight to their news section where you can sign up for updates or just follow along as the next batch of assays are released to the marketplace. Dr. Rebecca Hunter, great having you on the show again to walk us through these initial results. And as always, looking forward to our next conversation.
Me as well. Thanks, Shad.